That looks great. Andy, over to you. Ready to go?
All right, fantastic. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you just fine.
Okay, perfect. Well, yeah, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation to share our work amongst so many other brilliant projects. It's been really wonderful to watch some of them today. So I'm delighted to be here on behalf of Makespace Oxford and the Meanwhile in Oxfordshire Programme Partnership. As Christine mentioned, my name's Andy Edwards. I'm co-founder at Makespace and was the programme lead. And Makespace is a relatively young organisation, and we were set up by a group of architects, makers and non-profits, all frustrated at being priced out of our own city and unable to access space. And at Makespace, our agenda, as we talk about it, is spatial justice. We believe everyone has the right to affordable, secure and safe space, and we use Meanwhile as a lever to unlock spaces and build towards community ownership. So our story begins here in Oxford, and our work has very much been rooted in place, but our work has very quickly expanded through Meanwhile in Oxfordshire, working with a group of partners operate county-wide. Both Oxford and Oxfordshire are often associated with great wealth and prestige. However, Oxford is also one of the least affordable cities in the UK and one of the most unequal. The same can be said for the wider county, where many rural areas and neighbourhoods are experiencing considerable deprivation and neglect, whilst others are home to the richest 0.1%. But the county is also home to a fertile network of social enterprises and community groups, tackling a broad range of social justice issues, but many of these groups have been priced out from operating in their local areas. Oxford and surrounding market towns experiencing quite a range of pressures currently, and that's equivalent to many towns and cities up and down the country, from repeated market failures, austerity, antiquated taxation laws, and spiralling land prices. And there's been a steady decline in urban areas, and this is characterised often by rising vacancy numbers. So in February 2021, at the time the programme launched, there was a fear that COVID-19 would make this problem even worse. And during the programme, we identified and assessed almost 500 empty spaces, but we knew that there were many more out there as well. So Meanwhile in Oxfordshire was curated by 4 district councils and led by Oxford City Council, who between them secured £1.9 million of capital grant from the Oxfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership. And this was via MHCLG's Getting Building Fund. Makespace responded with a tender and a proposal to centre equity and community enterprise and social impact, and to use Meanwhile as a catalyst for wider systemic change. We were tasked with investing a capital grant in vacant buildings and scaling our model, and at the same time our team from just 3 to 15. The programme's ambitions were unprecedented. It had to be delivered in just 18 months, and all at a time of huge uncertainty in the midst of the pandemic. Crucially, we also raised over £500,000 in match funding to build a community development team, and this was to ensure legacy long beyond the capital grant had been spent. So the programme had very broad ambitions, but it can be summarised in these sort of key broad areas. So the first was about tackling that vacancy issue, and we were tasked with bringing up to 30 buildings across the county back into use. But we also wanted to bring people back to the high street, and at the time it was about bringing them back safely through activation and diversifying a range of uses. And then it was about lowering those barriers to accessing space by increasing affordability and enabling a diversity of spaces, models, and different types of uses. Then it was about creating jobs and quality jobs, all of them living wage, and especially targeting new and purpose-driven startups. And then finally, most excitingly for us, and underpinning it all was this idea of fostering an inclusive economy. And Claes defines that as an economy that functions naturally to produce social, economic, and environmental justice for all. So we worked across 16 towns and urban centres, engaged with nearly 500 organisations in need of space, worked across 5 district council areas and with over 20 landlords. We've got a network of spaces following what we call a hub and spoke model. And here you can see an illustration where the red dots illustrate solo resident spaces and the teal dots illustrate different multi-resident hub spaces. So we knew we had to bring design thinking to this challenge and a placemaking approach. fresh thinking for processes all too often driven by accountants, agents, and markets. And we achieve this by involving as wide a range of stakeholders as possible at every stage. And we started by working with our partners, Meanwhile Space CIC, and using the local knowledge of organizations like Fusion Arts, Aspire, and Soha to develop a place-based strategy. And then we embarked on identifying those vacant buildings, engaging with landlords and trying to develop a range of different leases and legal templates and models, all working with our partner, Wild Property. We then worked closely with our partners, Transition by Design Cooperative, and a range of community researchers to initiate spatial design processes and community engagement activities. This included rapid appraisal of buildings, engagement with a wide range of local stakeholders, and the design development. And then we carried out the refurbishment and fit-out works. And this was working with local contractors, artists, and in some cases rolling up our own sleeves as well. And the works ranged from very light touch fit-out to whole-scale building redesign and refurbishment and low-energy retrofit. And then finally, it was about matching organizations to their different spaces, and in some cases offering rent support or fit-out grants where we needed to ensure that those typically excluded from space could find their home. And despite what the image might suggest, the process was anything but linear and required constant agility, iteration, and learning in action, and we were often running multiple processes in parallel. So here's a glimpse of some of the solo spaces that we've reanimated, 20 in total across 7 different towns, most of them being former retail units, but also some office buildings and industrial units as well. And here you have a glimpse of our 6 multi-tenanted or multi-resident hub spaces in key urban areas where we were taking that placemaking approach, and that's Oxford, Didcot, Abingdon, Wantage, and Chipping Norton. And here Transition by Design led the design and created a toolkit capturing the essence of the make space approach, which included interior design and branding using local artists, reused materials, energy efficiency improvements, and interventions to wider physical accessibility and focus on gender inclusion. The spaces include community cafes and artists and maker studios, retail, theatre and dance studios, co-working spaces, event spaces, and more. And it can be summarized very quickly in these headlines. 28 buildings brought back into use. That's over 3,500 square meters that we reanimated on leases ranging from 12 months to 10 years. And we're even negotiating on a community asset transfer on one of these buildings. We created and supported over 130 jobs, and that's growing. And we've also housed over 60 organizations, also growing. But the numbers, they really only tell part of the story, don't they? And so I'd like to focus on, as we finish, what we really care about and what we know really makes great places, and that's the people that bring them to life. So I'd like to focus on the 3 stories of Lula, Diane, and Ollie. So focusing on Lula, who's been trading from markets across Oxford, cooking and serving her unique and delicious Ethiopian and Eritrean food, and has always been hoping to have her own premises, but until now has been priced out, and that was all but a dream. Makespace and the team worked with Lula to design a cafe and restaurant within a community hub, which would bring people together and help her business to grow. Lula is the only Black female-led business in Oxford with premises currently, and in 1 year alone has already hit the #1 slot for restaurants in Oxford on TripAdvisor. Then we have Ollie, who worked as a top seller in a national bookstore chain for many years, and he'd had a dream to set up his own business. With Makespace's help, he took over an empty shop and launched the wonderfully named Gulp Fiction, a second-hand bookstore and cafe selling locally sourced beers and great coffee. In just 18 months, Ollie has become one of the top booksellers in the country for key titles, has converted his Meanwhile lease into a long-term lease with the City Council, and is donating some of his first profits to other female-led businesses within the Makespace community, demonstrating a solidarity economy in action. And finally, we have Dr. Diane Regisford, Makespace is community wealth building advocate who's been working with partners in Blackbird Leys, one of the most deprived and underinvested areas around Oxford, to support new and emerging community businesses, supporting them through the creation of an oasis organising space in a former community centre. So, capital grant has been spent and all the buildings have been reopened, but now the real work starts, and we're focusing on some big ticket questions about how do we build community in these spaces and how do we foster a culture of mutual support and solidarity and encourage collaboration. We're also asking how activation and meanwhile use can act as a catalyst towards spatial justice, where groups develop a sense of belonging in their spaces, and we're ensuring that they're genuinely accessible and affordable to all. Our tactic here is meanwhile use, but our agenda is long term, and it's community place-based renewal. We know to achieve spatial justice, meanwhile must be a catalyst for wider systemic change, building power locally and moving towards community ownership. So how will it develop? Well, watch this space. Thank you.